Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Bowring, and I'm the New South Wales State Manager and Head of Partnerships at BOQ Specialist. Thanks for joining us for our new series, In the Know. While it's a crazy time in the world out there, we know that life must go on. And so as we go through this series of our webinars, we're going to talk about economic updates. We're going to look at residential property incentives from the government, other types of commercial investment. Look at things like starting your own practice or even acquiring a new practice as well. So be quite broad. We kick off tonight with a presentation on the health and wellbeing of medical practitioners. So I'm joined by our host, Clive Leventhal, who's the CEO of Experien Insurance Services, and also Dr Sally Phillips. I'll let Clive introduce Sally, but first, before I hand over to Clive, Experien Insurance Services have been a fantastic partner of BOQ Specialist for over 13 years now. They help a number of our customers with their life insurance and income protection needs, and we really value his insight. Just before I hand over to you, Clive, a quick mention. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the chat button. You can click the chat button and log a question at any time throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to get to it when we get to the end. But on that note, Clive and Sally, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Tim. My name's Clive, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's always great being hosted by BOQ Specialist, and I'm just going to quickly cover one initial slide, and then I'll hand over to Sally. Sally is a doctor that has been working in the insurance industry for over 20 years, and she currently works at the country's largest life insurer, which is an insurer called TEL. And Sally does a wide range of interesting work and roles at TEL and has tremendously good insights, which she's going to share with us tonight from behind the scenes. So just setting the context, as Tim said, we're very proud that we've been working together with the Bank of Queensland for 13 years now, where we've helped over 1,000 of the clients of Bank of Queensland for their life insurance and disability insurance services as an insurance broker. And as I mentioned, TEL, who is our guest tonight, is the largest life insurer in Australia. And we've had great dealings with TEL over the years. Many of the clients we deal with, we've recommended and they've joined TEL, and we've had a number of very successful experiences with TEL, most importantly when it comes to claim stage. So TEL have been very good to our clients and clients of Bank of Queensland. I just wanted to share some really insightful and interesting statistics from the life insurance industry, because there are sometimes negative connotations about insurance and whether insurers try, avoid or not pay claims, and that certainly isn't the case in the life insurance segment. Statistics were recently released for the year 2019, which showed that life insurers such as TEL paid over $12 billion in claims in just 1 year to over 100,000 Australians or families of Australians. And that's a significant amount of support for people when they really do need financial support at very vulnerable situations. If you average that out, that's a staggering $33 million a day to nearly 300 Australians, individuals and all their families. Two very interesting topics that will be covered to some degree in Sally's talk tonight are the concept of income protection insurance, and that product category alone resulted in $4 billion of claims being paid last year. And for permanent disability, another subcategory of insurance, there was over $2.5 billion in claims paid. So the reason we're bringing you this presentation and the reason we've asked Sally to join is we've managed to build up a lot of insights and experience over the years working as an insurance broker. And Sally and her team and her collective organization have even more experience. And we wanted to bring you information that's going to be relevant to you, not only from an insurance point of view, but an overall health and well-being point of view. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sally. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Sally.
Great. Thanks, Clive, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and chat to you this evening. And please feel free to ask questions as I go along. I've named this sort of health professionals, health and life, and generally through the presentation I'm going to be talking to health professionals, but you'll see that I will break out into doctors, dentists, vets. So Though I might be talking to one group, many of the stats that I'm going to be talking to will be can be extrapolated across many of the health professionals. So the way that I want to structure this is firstly to talk about your health and some of the aspects and data that we have around health professionals, and then to look at the interaction of health professionals with life insurers. Sometimes we get confused with workers' compensation and other insurance, so just a little bit of background on life insurance, which you may or may not know. And then just to talk about the way that we're viewing health and how life insurers are starting to move into the health space in today's world. So hopefully that you'll find this of use. So the first thing, let's look at your health and look at data. So I think, you know, I found the quote, or I've always known the quote of physician heal thyself. And I think it's often the case with doctors, and I'm a doctor and I know it myself, is that because we are there to take care of other people, it's really difficult when we start to think about taking care of ourselves. And somebody told me something quite important, is that you can't take care of other people unless you're okay. So I think one of the key messages that I want you to take away from today is that you really have to look after yourself. And I'm going to take you through some pretty scary stats, and we'll talk around, you know, potentially some of the things that you can do about it. But I think ultimately you probably know what to do and you're happy to tell other people what to do, but sometimes you've really got to take the time and look after yourself. So what are the main health issues that are facing doctors and trainees? So up front, I think I need to say to you that, you know, I've looked at data for health professionals and it's not that easy to find, and there certainly isn't really good up-to-date data, particularly in Australia, around the issues, the health issues that are facing health professionals, be it doctor, dentist, vets, or any of the other health professionals. So you'll see some of the data that I've got is global data, and I'll tell you where those studies come from. And again, as I said, I think they can be extrapolated. And then some of the data from Australia, some of it's recent, but some of it is a few years old. But I think it's still current, and I still think that it's worthwhile going through this data with you. So the AMA did a study in 2011, which is now 9 years ago, so it is fairly old, which noted that doctors are healthier than average. But it masked the problem in certain areas where incidence is increased. So this means that we're okay from a cardiovascular disease perspective, we're okay from a chronic condition perspective, but really burnout, depression, anxiety, substance use problems, dysfunctional interpersonal relationships, physical hazards, so things like needle stick injuries, for example, and then in female doctors, increased bullying, sexual harassment, and workloads. So these were the main issues that were called out in 2011. Now, the AMA then put out a position statement around how to deal with this, and I suggest that any doctor really goes to have a look at this position statement. It was updated recently on the 14th of July 2020, so it's really how you can deal with each of these issues. So how to deal with burnout, how to really structure your practice or structure your work environment, that you're getting a good balance between off time and on time. Depression, anxiety, again, when to reach out for help, how to reach out for help, to be aware of substance use problems, because often that's our blind spot. We don't realize that we're drinking a little bit more than we should do, or that we're just popping a couple of pills on a more regular basis. So I would urge you to go and have a look at the AMA position statement of the 14th of July 2020 to have a look at it. This article came from the RACGP Health Doctors, and this was 2013. So it was talking to a recent cluster of suicides in doctors, which were looking at, you know, overwhelming pressures that there are in healthcare. And remembering that all of this data that I'm talking about is pre-COVID. So, you know, with COVID, I think the problems are probably exponentially increased on what I'm showing you here. Again, looking at doctors, so mental health conditions that are in various health professionals. So this is from Beyond Blue. Again, it's 2013. It's a little bit older. And this is looking at doctors by speciality. So this is experiencing really high psychological distress. So you can see that oncologists are probably higher than most, with anaesthetists sitting just below that. But if you then couple this with the percentage of doctors who are drinking or using or harmful behavior or using substances at harmful levels, this actually becomes a more worrying picture. So again, anaesthetists are sitting there with, use of harmful substances with, sort of a high risk of psychological distress. So I think, wherever you're sitting sort of in these columns, it is something to be aware of, that we really need to be taking care of ourselves. The AMA worked together with Doctors for Doctors, and this was set up sort of about 10 years ago, and it's really looking at doctors being able to go somewhere which is confidential and where they can deal with particularly mental health conditions. So it coordinates doctors' well-being, it coordinates their health problems, and it is a group of people and a group of doctors that are looking after doctors. So if you are a doctor and you are experiencing a mental health condition, again, this is somewhere that you can reach out to. It's confidential, it's run by doctors, so they do understand the levels of stress and burnout that you're going through. I've spoken about doctors and specialists. Dentists are also at really high risk, and I think this was an article which is showing that 28% of dentists sought help for their mental health disorders. But I found what was really concerning is that 44% of dentists believe that they could solve the problem on their own. And although we think that we're okay and that we can deal with our own mental health conditions, and sorry, when I'm talking about a mental health condition, I'm talking about a mental health illness or disorder, in other words, something which is DSM-5 categorized, or I'm talking about a mental health problem or issue, in other words, signs or symptoms which are not formally diagnosed at this point. So for 44% of dentists to think that they're okay dealing with a mental health condition on their own, that's a little bit scary. This is a study that's come out of Korea, and it's quite a recent study. And although it is out of Korea, it was quite a comprehensive study, so I think it is worthwhile sharing with the dentists that are out there. And it's looking at the stress, so the occupational stress, depression states, anxiety, and also sleep. And so if you can see that people that are problematic, 55% are sort of showing depression, or 43% on a true depression scale, 13% with anxiety, and 55% are showing a sleep disorder. Now, there are numerous studies, and you probably know the publications better than I do, of where sleep is impacted. This has a really strong impact, particularly on depression. So if you couple the anxiety and depression, and again, we know that those are psychiatrically comorbid conditions. So often when you've got depression, you will have anxiety as well. And the study didn't look at those where they're sitting there in conjunction together with sleep. This is not painting such a great picture. This probably is key for us to be looking at. So our sleep patterns really need to be optimized. We work really long hours. There might be variations in the daily routine, so there might be on and off shifts. So if there is a sleep problem, it probably is, again, worth reaching out to somebody who specializes in sleep disorders at how to deal with this, because this is a fundamental issue, and it's something that sometimes we can deal with without medication. Vets are at risk too. So vets generally are going into veterinary medicine because they love animals, and they love dealing with animals. And the constant pressures, the long working hours, the fact of having to put animals down on a regular basis, the emotional situations, dealing with people who are obviously distraught, has shown that vets have got a significantly high suicide rates. And it's showing that the suicide rate is 4 times the national rate in Australia. That is really significant, and this is something that we have to do something about. And vets probably are a bit of a silent occupation at the moment, in that we're not putting enough focus on the stress and the mental health conditions that vets are dealing with at the moment. So again, if you are a vet, you are listening, and you are feeling that you have a mental health condition, you need to be reaching out to a colleague, a friend, or maybe even your local doctor to do something about it. This is a UK study which was looking at occupational illnesses and injuries. And again, this is probably more for the doctors, so physicians, surgeons, doctors in general. And it's looking at the reported occupational hazard of being that particular speciality. And again, if you look at it, burnout, depression, stress, burnout, psychiatric illness, stress, burnout, psychiatric illness. We're not seeing much of other conditions coming through. You're not seeing in this list cardiovascular, stroke, diabetes, not even seeing cancer that's coming through here. So, we've got to take cognizant of the fact. And I think important in this, and, I'm obviously not here to be looking at the portfolios you have, but the importance is to ensure also that you have the financial instruments to allow you to take time out to be able to get yourselves better and to look after yourselves. And I'll leave those discussions for Tim and Clive to have with you. This is an Indian study, and I've included this Indian study because it's recent, so it's 2019. And again, if you start to see the stats, they're pretty much the same. So stress at really high levels, at a frequency of 43%. Is stress, which is, in the Indian population is very similar to the sharp-related injuries that are there in the biological hazards. Physical, psychological, social, or sexual abuse at 21%. So if we're taking 43 and 21, that's looking at a mental health condition scenario sitting there exceptionally high. And again, it's looking at, the death rates in all the doctors. What is quite concerning is the death rate that's sitting in the accident and emergency level. Now, what the study didn't go into was the reason behind that, but obviously concerning is potentially a higher suicide rate in those particular areas. So, sorry, this is painting a little bit of a bleak picture, but we need to look at why is this occurring? So why are doctors having so much stress and burnout? Working long hours, taking care of people, not taking care of yourself. But why don't we access healthcare? What is it? So often it's embarrassment. So we look at other people, so why should we be sick as well? And we don't want to admit our own fallibility and our own failings potentially. There's also time, because we are naturally there to care for other people. So if there's a room full of patients, or there's an emergency room full of sick animals or sick people, or people with dental emergencies, we're going to be focusing on that first rather than taking the time out for ourselves. Cost, and this maybe is part of this presentation, is that what happens if you are sick and you have to take time off work? Are you adequately insured to be able to do that? So both from a private health insurance perspective, because if you're going into a public health system, are you going to go onto a waiting list? Or are you going to be okay to be able to take off extended periods of time? And obviously from an income protection, do you have enough that if you are booked off for a mental health condition, for burnout, for stress, that you are going to be able to cover the costs of both your practice and your income? Personality, health professionals by default are sort of the type A personalities, if you want to go back to that old terminology, where it's a very driven and needing to do things all the time. So resilience is high unless it is always being stretched until you're reaching that point of burnout. And then speciality. So with different specialities, you don't want to, again, for people to be seeing that fallibility. Who to see? If you know a lot of people in the industry, you don't want to be going to those people with your problems, because again, it goes back to your own brand and wanting to be seen as somebody who's in control. And then for many of us, we're satisfied with our own care. So, we treat other people, so why shouldn't we treat ourselves? But again, I don't need to be telling you this, is that we lose objectivity when we're treating ourselves and our family, and we shouldn't be doing that. So if there are any symptoms that you are concerned about, you should be reaching out to see somebody else. And this goes together with the fear of loss of control. Part of that type A personality is the need to be in control. And that's natural to health professionals. We are in control of others' health. We're in control of the way that they diagnose, the investigations, the treatment that we prescribe to them. and ultimately often of their prognosis. We need to be in control of our own health. This isn't always the right way to go. But what you can be in control of is to make sure that you are protected both from a medical and a financial perspective. And then there's the awareness of the implications. So if I present to somebody with a mental health condition, what impact is that going to have on my insurance application? And I'll come back to that a little bit later on in the discussion. And then the burden to colleagues. So if I am working in a practice and I do take time off, and let's say I take off 3 months because of depression or anxiety, what impact is that going to have on the practice? Confidentiality, will other people be talking around my condition? Is the quality of care going to be what I expect it to be? And we have a culture of always expecting to be healthy. And then obviously the practice and workplace structure that you're in. So it might not allow you to have time to look after yourself. Now, if that picture wasn't bleak enough, what are the effects of COVID-19? So we know that health professionals prior to COVID were suffering with increased levels of stress, burnout, depression, anxiety, substance abuse. PwC has recently done, so in April 2020, so this was before the second spike, they did an impact analysis of the healthcare profession and particularly the healthcare workforce. So we know that there's an overwhelming burden of COVID-19, which is being added to a health system which was already at capacity. So we knew that in public health systems, that waiting lists, particularly for elective surgeries, were already fairly long. OPD was particularly already overbooked. So then you shut down elective surgery, and this is now going to be, once that's opened up again, it increases those waiting periods. You've got a health system which is starting to shift. So what is the value of private healthcare versus public healthcare? There's new types of treatment. So the rebalancing of resources. So some doctors are using telehealth. There's digital health. Some doctors' practices have almost collapsed because people don't want to be coming in to see a GP or have a consult with a GP. And the same with veterinary surgery. People don't want to be bringing in their dogs because they're very concerned around catching COVID in that environment. And so resources are having to be rebalanced. So you're seeing people that, particularly in the medical profession, surgeons that were previously doing elective surgery and lower priority might be rebalanced into real-time emergency departments or potentially looking after COVID people. And then there's the fear of particularly frontline healthcare workers of actually getting infected themselves. They're watching people die and go on ventilators and being in ICU with COVID-19. And there's a fear that if they are in close proximity, are they liable to catch this infection? Are they going to be taking that infection back to their family and to their friends and to their older relatives? So there's that fear and sort of the heightened mental health anxiety that follows that. There was a stat that the suggestion that 10% of positive COVID-19 cases occurred in health workers in Victoria. That number is probably outdated now, and we probably know that number is much higher, the percentage is much higher. The other side of this is obviously worrying about professional indemnity risks. So if somebody with COVID-19 comes into your practice, somebody who comes into your practice contracts COVID-19 in your consulting rooms, what is the liability around that? So, could they hold you liable for them actually getting that infection, particularly if that infection leads to ICU or even death? How do you protect your own staff? What are the face covering requirements around that? What do you do with medical exemption certificates? So we're seeing this from a life insurance perspective, where somebody will come to you and they're on immunosuppressant therapy and they're worried about their risk, and you know that they're in a higher risk group, so you want to book them off from work so they can self-isolate because they cannot be in an environment where there's a risk. So what is your liability around that? And then charging restrictions. So what is the impact to your practice of being charging a telehealth consult versus a normal consult? And again, what is the impact from a practice the practice, the financial implications to your practice for doing that. So I think as we all know, the pandemic isn't over. We are in the first wave now. There's a potential of second wave of mental health condition claims coming through, and then potentially a tertiary wave where chronic conditions, cancers, which haven't come in for sort of early diagnosis or preventative screening testing, may come through in sort of a later stage further down the track. And what are the impacts going to be on healthcare professionals in that aspect? And that goes for both humans and for animals. So I think the effects of that. With dentistry, there's no difference. So, you know, are your patients neglecting issues with their teeth at the moment because they don't want to come and see you because they're concerned around getting COVID-19? And what does that mean? So when those patients do come back, are you going to be seeing, you know, dental pathology in a much more advanced stage than what you normally would? And then it's much more difficult to treat. It's much more difficult to get a good outcome. And does that lead to a professional indemnity situation? So what are the stresses on you? If we look at the TEL perspective, so this is maybe a more balanced view. So, you know, I've shown you sort of quite a negative side of the stats and the data. The TEL data for health professionals shows that in our retail book, which is an underwritten book, health professional claims account for about 5% of the total claims portfolio. So it's not excessive at all. And you can see again here that we're seeing quite a balanced portfolio of claims by cause. So this is across all benefits. So it does include critical illness, TPD, total and permanent disability, and income protection and death. Our two biggest causes in income protection are mental health and behavioral disorder claims, but also cancer claims as well, and musculoskeletal conditions. This particularly with injuries and fractures from sports in particular. So we are seeing a more balanced approach. And I think some of the good news, and I wasn't able to get a graph for you, and I'm really sorry about this, and again, it is for all health professionals, is around the duration of claim, particularly for income protection. And we do know that 50% of all healthcare claims that come in for income protection are back at work within a 3-month period. So again, these are not chronic conditions. Sometimes it just means that you need a little bit of time off, you need the right treatment, and then you can get back into practice and back on the road again. So I think for me, this is probably a more positive sign of people that are in distress, take a bit of time off and then get back to work again. So that is the story around your own health. I probably haven't told you anything you don't know. All I'm trying to do with that is probably just stimulate some thoughts of you looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, do I have a problem? And if you do have a problem, please reach out to somebody. I have listed some of the organizations that or areas or collateral that you can reach out to, but just that probably is the main message, that if you're not okay, it is okay to ask for help. I just want to talk a little bit about life insurance and what we do and who we are. And I think a question that I frequently get is, you're a doctor, what are you doing in life insurance? Well, life insurance is all about medicine, and health is at the very core that we do. And I'm often expressing to my colleagues that if people don't get sick or injured, we don't exist as an organization, because that's what we do. For people that get sick or get injured, we pay out a financial amount that should put the person in the same financial position as if that medical trigger had never occurred. We differ from workers' compensation schemes because we can't fund treatment. So it's not our role to look at a condition that's specific to the workplace and say, yep, that condition needs this particular treatment, and this is what we're going to pay, and this is how long we're going to pay for. Our products are different to that. Our products are really, as I said, designed to cover financially any loss for a particular medical trigger. And we're probably very allied to health professionals in that our aim is to get people back to their best health as quickly as possible. We want to get them back in the workplace. We want to get them back into functioning. And if they can't, we want to get them to a state of their best health that they can have the most optimize quality of life until termination, and whatever that termination is, be that death or be that an ongoing chronic condition. Our main benefits, although we're called life insurance, it's a bit of a misnomer. Our main benefits include death cover. So obviously, if you die, included in that is terminal illness cover. And there's various benefit descriptions around terminal illness. And generally, what we're looking for is somebody that is expected to die, so with a poor prognosis, to die within either a 12-month or a 24-month period. In the retail space, that's sitting at a 12-month period at the moment. Really difficult to see a claim form come in from somebody who has filled in their own terminal illness form, because what they're basically saying to us is that I know that I'm going to die within a 12-month period, and please can I have my death cover now? Very, very difficult. Critical illness is a product, this may be called trauma insurance, severe illness, dread disease insurance. Critical illness pays out a lump sum amount for a specific condition or diagnosis. So for example, if you have a heart attack, we will pay out a lump sum. If you have a stroke, and there's various definitions that sit behind that. The life insurance industry has been criticized, and many of you will have seen Four Corners and the insure incident, which occurred sort of 4 years ago, around definitions and are we keeping up with the times. So we're working really hard to make sure that our definitions match the clinical definitions that are out in practice at the moment. So, you know, moving from a universal 3 to a universal 4 heart attack definition to ensure that we're in keeping with the current TIA versus stroke definitions. It's difficult for us because we do our pricing on one set of definition, and if the clinical terminology shifts, then it might not be possible for us to shift the pricing for that entire population. So we then have to look at what the difference is in between that and whether we can absorb it or not. So for us, it's a bit of a longer process, but we are trying to keep up in a much more efficient way than what we were doing previously. Total and permanent disablement, or TPD, is a lump sum payment for somebody who is unlikely to ever work in their own or any occupation ever again. It's a really harsh benefit, and it's probably one of the worst benefits that life insurers can offer. So it did have a function many years ago. I think it's something that all life insurance companies are looking at. So for us to tell somebody who's 33, for example, or in their early 30s, that they'll never ever work again, it's a really hard label. But at the same time, that if somebody is significantly sick, so let's say you do have a really bad chronic depression, or for example, a bipolar disorder where you're not able to function in your practice, that TPD does need to be available, that you can pay off debt from a lump sum perspective. So we've got to think of smarter ways of doing it, but that product is out at the moment. And then lastly, income protection cover, which pays out a monthly benefit really based on your income. And generally, that benefit will be paid out at about 75% of your current income. And the reason that it's sitting at 75% and not 100% is that we're really trying to incentivize you to get back to work. Because if we're paying out 100%, there's no reason to get back to work. What we are looking at again is that if somebody is really sick and they're unlikely to return to their work, then should we be lifting that income to 100%. So we are looking at our benefits. We understand that many of them are old, many of them need a bit of a shake-up, but these are the benefits that are out at the moment. These are the main ones. There are other benefits that sit around that, so business protection, for example, business expenses, or others, and Clive can probably tell you a bit more that I haven't put in here. Now, the way that we price, pricing is done on data. And the data we use generally is sort of an all-cause mortality or an all-cause morbidity model. We look at general insurance, general population mortality morbidity data, and then the insured population is a slightly better subset of that, because we know that people that take out life insurance generally have better access to healthcare and utilize that healthcare better. So the mortality and morbidity rates we find are better in the insured population, and so that would be reflected in the premium. So the premium, the base premium, is based on your age. your gender, and your smoking status. So those are the main factors that we take into account when we're pricing. And the pricing will be different on the different benefits that we offer. So, if we're looking at death, then obviously we're looking just at mortality rates. Whereas if we look at income protection, we're looking at morbidity across a wide cover. So, for example, you could have an ingrown toenail, and if that ingrown toenail becomes really infected, then if you are a doctor, dentist, vet, any health professional, that might mean that you cannot work for a while. So we have to take that into account in our pricing. So income protection is really covering all calls. What we then do is that we set a base price. We then ask you to come in for individual underwriting. And underwriting is then saying that we're not going to cross-subsidize you across a total pool. So if you have group insurance through a superannuation fund, then that is done through a cross-subsidized model. So we look at a risk pool, and everybody is put in that risk pool, and you're paying a premium based on the healthy, the sick that are within that pool. In individual underwriting, it's just you. So we're looking at the insured population mortality morbidity curve, and then we look at your health, your occupation, your financial position, and any avocational risk that you might have. And we'll have a look at you across that curve to say, well, you're a 50% extra mortality or a 50% extra morbidity, going up to sort of 400% is probably the risk tolerance of most companies. If we believe that we cannot put a percentage increase in premium on a particular risk, then we might put an exclusion on it. So let's say that you do have depression and you've been diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, and you come in for an application a week or a couple of days after you've been diagnosed. Now, we know that the chances of you being able to claim on income protection for that particular condition is 100%, because the day after you have your policy in force, you can put a claim in for exactly the condition that you put on your application form. So we're saying that that risk is too great for us, and that we cannot price that risk because it's 100% guarantee that we're going to be paying a claim. So what we would then do is put an exclusion on your policy. So we'll say to you that, yep, we can cover you for everything, but we're not going to be covering you for mental health conditions. We might say that we can review you in 2 years' time, or we might review you in a 5-year period, depending on what your treatment looks like and various other factors. Now, the evidence that sits behind underwriting is evidence-led. So we use a lot of evidence-based research material, but we also use our own claims experience. We also look to our reinsurers. So reinsurers are global companies which pool mortality, morbidity data from around the globe. And then they drop that down into the various regions and then flex that data with the local mortality morbidity data. So there is a strong science that sits behind underwriting. And we're often questioned around the data that we utilize for underwriting, but there's a strong balance of science that sits behind it. The other side where we're using a lot of medicine is in our claims assessment. In claims assessment, we're really looking at 2 different things. So one, we're looking at policy validity. In other words, is everything okay with your policy? Do you have the right benefit? Are your premiums up to date? Did you disclose everything that you should have at underwriting? And then we look at claims liability. So we're saying, right, with the particular condition that you have, are you able to claim under the particular benefit that you want to claim under? So, for example, if you have a broken toe, you might be able to claim under income protection, but you wouldn't be able to claim under critical illness because that particular condition might not be covered under the critical illness definitions. And where we really need your help is when we require reports from health professionals, which we look at both in underwriting and claims assessment. And the different types of reports that we get depend on the benefit and on the assessment area, so whether we're looking at the underwriting or the claim space. Now, for many years, we've called for full clinical notes, particularly from GPs, because it gives us a really good overview of a particular patient. And we utilize all that data, and sitting behind that, we're not just making some wild assessments on it. We're looking at the symptoms that have been there. We're looking at the investigations that have been done. We're looking at any diagnosis that's been made. we're looking at treatment compliance, and the outcome to that treatment. So, for example, if you've had somebody or yourself and you've been through a grief reaction and you've had a few counselling sessions, but you've worked through that grief and that has been sort of a year or two ago, then we don't have to place a mental health exclusion on that particular case, because we know it was a grief reaction, it's responded well to treatment, and you've gone back and there's been no further episodes of mental health conditions. So sometimes we call for clinical notes. We may call for a PMAR, which is a personal medical attendance report. And this is really looking at all the history that you know. So it's taking the clinical notes and it's asking the doctor to summarize all those clinical notes and provide us with a body system categorization of all the different conditions. An AMR is an attendant medical report, and often we will call that from a specialist. So this might be on a specific cause. So we might say, we need to know about an echo. So we might ask for an AMR from a cardiologist asking specifically about an echo. An IME is an independent medical examination, and this we might call for at claim time. So where we have got differing opinions, so for example, if a doctor has said to us that somebody will never work again, and we can see that they maybe have a mental health condition, but they've only been treated for 6 months and they don't have a definitive diagnosis, they've never seen a psychiatrist, potentially they might not have seen a psychologist. We do have internal doctors, so at TAL we have 5 doctors at the moment. If they've looked at it and they've said, look, this doesn't make sense, we might send it out to a specialist as an IME to get a second opinion, basically. And that opinion we will look at to say, and if that IME comes back, for example, and it's a psychiatrist to say, yep, they've only had 6 months of treatment, but this particular person is exceptionally sick and their prognosis is really poor, then it gives us the wherewithal to sort of say, right, we're not going to wait any longer, let's just pay this claim and get this person the support that they need. A brief medical report is similar to an AMR, but a brief medical report we might call more from a GP, sort of saying, can you tell us about the diabetes mellitus? Can you tell us about the mental health condition? A GPME is a medical examination by the GP. So all the others are report. The medical examination is where we actually want a full examination. So we want to know about the, are there any heart murmurs? We might want to know the lungs are expanding as they should, that there's no crackles, etc. We do ask various questionnaires, which again are specific. We may call for a FOS check, which is blood pressure, BMI, and a urine test, a pulse rate. We might ask for various bloods, and this again might be dependent on a specific case. It might be discretionary or it might be mandatory. So we call mandatory requirements when it's above a certain level of cover and often above a certain age. We might call a vocational assessment at claim time. In other words, is there any other type of work this particular person can do? There's something called a functional capacity assessment, which again, sorry, excuse me, I'm just going to have a bit of water. Might be a functional to say what function can this person do, because we often hear what people can't do. Sometimes we want to know what they can do. We might call hospital records. Sometimes we get records from workers' compensation. And sorry, I've lost my slide. And we might get Medicare history. Standard 56 has just come through, and standard 26 from the FSC is saying that we can no longer call clinical notes. Now, this standard has been put on hold for a little while because with COVID, it's been difficult for doctors to do reports because they have been overwhelmed with COVID cases. So this standard will likely come into effect next year. And this means that insurance companies can no longer call clinical notes from GPs. I'm sorry, I've just seen the time, so I'm going to keep moving. We're not allowed to get any My Health records. Even if a patient consents, we cannot get My Health records. And then there's impacts of COVID-19 on requesting. So we do understand that particularly GPs are quite busy at the moment. So we're making sure that the requests that we do for reports, either at underwriting or claim time, are the right reports and that we're not over-requesting information. I'm just going to move on to insurers and health. And again, I'm just going to run through this quite quickly. So insurers are getting involved in wellness. So we know that we ask for a lot of medical information at underwriting time. We have a 360 view of people's health at underwriting time. We also know a lot about people at claim time. So we know their psychosocial factors, we know their medical triggers, we know their finances, but we don't know much about what goes on in between. And we feel that we actually have an obligation to assist the Australian community in getting them healthier, because we do have the ability to do primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. So we are starting to look at where we can really play a role. And we've got data, and that data can help us drive predictive and underwriting claims models. In other words, that if we work in a certain area, does this help us in the way that we underwrite? Does it help us in the way that we manage claims? It also means that we can deepen the customer relationship. So that will assist us, obviously, in having a better proposition that we can offer. And then, obviously, the healthier, the more healthy lives that we get within our pool, the more sustainable the premiums are. So it leads to fewer and shorter duration claims. So you will see more and more life insurers are starting to look at the full journey of health across our customer journey to see where we can actually add value into that. And I think with that, I actually might stop. I think, for me, the last question for you is, life insurance, is it a value? Well, yes, it absolutely is a value. From a TEL perspective, we view health as mental, physical, and financial health. And financially, if you can't look after yourself when you're sick, there's obviously going to have a much bigger impact on both mental and physical health. So it's important to have the right products at the right time. And for me, key is how we partner with health professionals to ensure that we're doing the right thing at the right time, and that we're there sitting alongside, particularly doctors, to ensure that we're helping in patients' journeys to get them back to health where they can be. And with that, I'm going to stop and just see if there's any questions coming through. My apologies, I've gone on for way too long.
No, all good, Sally. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Before we get into it, if you'd like to ask a question, if you look at the chat box on your right and click on there, you'll be able to leave us a question. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If you've asked a question that's kind of personal in nature or specific to your certain individual circumstance, we'll make sure that either Sally or Clive get in touch with you afterwards to answer those questions. Just while waiting for them to come in, Sally, obviously we've talked a lot at the start around the health and well-being of our medical practitioners. We've also, a lot of medical practitioners will have staff in their practices who may be, experiencing some kind of mental health issues due to, as you said, I think the fear of patients coming in and potentially infecting them. What kind of conversations can medical professionals be having with their staff around obviously protecting themselves, but also around their mental health and well-being as well?
I think, so Tim, I think it's a really important question. So I think it's one, acknowledging their own, and secondly, probably looking for those signs and symptoms, because it might not be that their staff are going to verbalize those concerns. So if they're starting to become a little bit more isolated, you can see there's a bit more anxiety, they're becoming a bit more snappy, that they're sort of rushing things a little bit or coming in late. So any of those signs and symptoms, it might not be a performance issue. It might be that there's a mental health condition that's sitting behind that. And then probably to verbalize that with them, just to say, is everything okay? We've got Are You Okay Day. It's having that conversation, maybe setting up a cup of coffee with them outside of practice, and then referring them to, there's multiple bodies. So Beyond Blue, Black Dog have got multiple really good programs. There are online programs. If they've got anyone that's under 25, Origin, Headspace, really good programs to have a look at.
Awesome. I'll just add something on the insurance side.
You're right.
Tim, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm just going to add something on the insurance side. And in relation to that question, an insurance product that should be considered for practice owners is management liability insurance, in case any of the actions that the owner of the business takes leads to a potential claim or legal suit. So having that with your business insurance policy is something to consider in protecting you against any claims brought against you by any current or past employees.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll just come to some questions from the audience now. So a quick question from Prakash. What percentage of insured medical professionals make a claim compared to other professionals or the general population?
I probably have to take the exact percentage on notice, but from the data that we've had a look at, it's a really small percentage. In other words, from all of those insured. So, you know, if 5% of our total book is health professionals, that's a weighted stat. So, you know, that probably tells you that of all the health professionals that we have in our books, only 5% are claiming.
Tim, just to give some perspective from our point of view, we've helped nearly 300 insured lives over the last 7 or so years get claims, many of those being doctors and dentists. We've dealt with a lot of claims that amounts to about $80 million. So we certainly have seen that medical professionals are not immune from risks, whether it's from trivial but serious injuries such as skiing accidents and so on, to unfortunately, you know, terrible illnesses such as cancer and other conditions.
Yeah, and I think it's I think just, you know, the shadow to that is that, you know, if it's 5%, we need to, you know, make it clear that we're there for claiming. So if there are people that are in distress and need to claim, they need to come forward.
Yes.
That's what it's there for.
Just while we're on that, Clive, so Rachel's asked a question and asked if you've got an interesting case study you could share for one of your clients where they've obviously had to use their insurance and has been able to support them.
Yeah, sure. We've actually got a case recently for a vet practitioner who was quite badly injured when he had an accident with a large animal that fell on him, and as a result of that, and he was insured with TEL. As a result of that, he's had a number of claim payouts from his various policies, but he received a particularly larger claim payout, which was important for total and permanent disability. So he had some immediate severe injuries, but he also had an inability to keep working in the future. So injuries are very common in what we've seen. We've had many claims for mental illness, and fortunately most of those people do get better. And we've also had a high number of claims for all sorts of, let's call it traditional, that's probably not a great word, illnesses, such as heart illnesses or cardiovascular other illnesses or cancer and so on.
I have a question here from Erica. Erica's asked, what does business protection cover? Which is probably, you know, pretty topical in the age of COVID now.
Yep. So there's two types in the world that we work in and what we speak to clients about. There's two types of business protection cover. The type Sally briefly alluded to is a particular product that if you're disabled and you're not at work, then fixed operating expenses of your business, which don't go away when you're sick, such as your lease, can be paid from the insurer. That's one type, so it's disability related. The other type of business protection is what's called property and liability business protection, otherwise known as business insurance, and that protects your business against perils such as fires and floods, and that concept of management liability that I mentioned earlier. And each particular practice or person is going to have different needs, and they would need to consider which of those products or all of those products are best suited for them.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got another question here from Belinda asking, how loading's determined for income protection?
So it very much depends on the condition. So what's sitting behind that is we generally use reinsurance manuals, and so it's calculated. And it's calculated on incidence prognosis. So to say, for example, if it's a particular type of cancer, we'll look at the staging of the cancer, we'll look at the cell type of the cancer, we'll look at the known effects of treatment of the cancer. We'll look at the 5-year, 10-year survival period, and then they'll make, so the reinsurers do this with actuaries and with medical professionals. They'll look at that and say, right, our risk of a claim over a 7-10-year period is going to be that this person will claim probably in year 3. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the risk to us is a 50 or 100% mortality, in which case that will be the loading.
Tim, I'll just add some color there that the concept of loadings is a competitive aspect between insurers. So insurers might take different views, and the reinsurers that back them might take different views. So you might find that for a particular condition, TEL might have a loading of 5%, but another insurer might have a loading of 10%. And you might also find that over time, the insurer will be happy to review the loading or exclusion and potentially reduce it or take away the exclusion over time. So we do a lot of work with clients where we do engage the various insurers and try see if, based on the person's changed situation or the insurer's changed situation, whether a better outcome can be achieved.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This question from Ivan might talk a little bit to that as well. So, if someone's had, mental health counselling or treatment, can they still obtain life insurance or disability insurance after that fact?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this goes to the point I was trying to make, is that we ask a lot of questions, and doctors in particular often don't understand why we're asking around signs, symptoms, treatment, investigation, prognosis, diagnosis. We're asking all of those because all of those are really important for us to be able to look at an evidence-informed way of coming to a conclusion as to what we're going to be able to offer. So if somebody has had a mental health condition, there are very, very few circumstances where we wouldn't offer any cover whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And generally at the moment, if it's current or if it's recent, we'll probably put an exclusion on, because as I said, the risk of claiming on that policy almost immediately is pretty high. But we will look at multiple factors. And sometimes, in many cases where people have disclosed mental health conditions, we will look at standard rates for those. In other words, no exclusion. So it depends on the case.
We've found that insurers have been universally very fair and reasonable for people who have had issues in the past, particularly if they're single episode issues. And insurers have done a lot of work over the last 5-10 years to make sure that they are fair and reasonable. And that is a common misunderstanding amongst the public, who might think, whether it's mental illness or other conditions, that insurance isn't available, where insurers do seem to bend over backwards and at great cost to themselves try to find ways to get more information, to find a way to insure the person on some particular terms, if not just on standard terms.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And we're starting to, sorry Tim, we're starting to move. So we've been very clinically evidence-led, so very biological, and we're starting to move more into the psychosocial factors. So from a TEL perspective, we've just launched some research with University of Sydney looking at predictors of mental health conditions. And these are outside of the biological predictors. So we're hoping that will help inform our underwriting as well, to be more justified and, again, more evidence informed than currently.
Fantastic. We've just ticked over 7 o'clock, so I might just ask one more question and then we wrap up. So for all of us as individuals on the line, obviously you mentioned the importance of sleep in terms of our own mental well-being. I know with having 3 kids, if I don't get enough sleep, it's not great if it goes for a long period of time. What sort of tips and tricks could we take home tonight, which can just, those little 1%ers that can help us out with that sort of mental well-being?
So I think with regard to sleep, it's not the number of hours. So it's around the quality of sleep. So I think stop worrying about the number of hours you're getting. So there's some people that will have 3 hours of high quality sleep. And if you're getting that, that's okay. So don't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and run around thinking, oh my God, I should be back at sleep. I should, I've only had 4 hours. That might be enough. So if you're waking up and you're feeling refreshed, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, that's okay. There obviously are sleep hygiene. So reducing obviously TVs, noise, having a routine is really important. Only having your bedroom for sleep is really important. I think, you know, the other tips that we use from a mental health perspective is mindfulness, is obviously really important. I know it's a sort of a catchphrase, but it really is just trying to focus on a positive piece, and just really thinking about that piece and thinking about what you're doing. And then seeking help. So, you know, relationship experts, dealing with kids. We found one of the biggest take-ups we've had is we've got an expert in to help with relationship management and caring for kids. That's really important right now. So I think it's each individual, what each individual will do. You know, diet, unbelievably important. The data is so clear on that. Exercise, it doesn't mean that you need to be ensuring that you're running every half an hour, but make sure you're walking or you're doing something, even if it's gardening or mowing the lawn. Exercise, getting out, looking at the sunshine.
I know definitely from being in isolation for a number of months, I took many teleconferences or going for a walk, and just being outside made such a difference to being cooped up at home. Yeah. So on that note, Sally, thank you so much for joining us and hosting us tonight, and thanks, Clive, for introducing Sally and being part of the Q&A panel. It's been fantastic to have you on. Thanks to everyone on the line for your time. No problem, and taking the time out from your families. I know it's night time and it is hard after work to put the time aside, but thank you for joining us. If we haven't got to your questions, we will reach out to you just to make sure we cover off. Please join us. Our next webinar will be in a fortnight's time. We will be focusing on the next round of industry and government stimulus measures in terms of coronavirus. We know payment deferrals are coming to an end in September. There is the ability to extend them. There are another number of other incentives coming in as well. So please join us for that. But on that note, thank you so much and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.